Yes.
Look, so the work that I'm going to show today is the Iranian series. So that's the work that's also being exhibited at the Biennale, both online and in physical form. Just to say a few things about like how this series started. Actually, my relationship to India, well, was as always has been a very important part of my life for the past 10 years, I'd say. And actually, India is where I picked up the camera and set out to become a photographer back in 2010, 11. So at the time, I had the chance to come to India and Delhi for a year for an exchange program at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and I was only 19 at the time, and so um, it sparked two things. One, an interest in how cities are changing, and large cities in particular, and two, an interest in photography. And well, since then, I haven't really looked back, and I've been combining photography and thinking about urban landscapes and how cities are made, and the role of architecture and architects as well as just generally people in general. Um, so can I share my screen? One sec. Am I allowed to do
Sure.
it? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So you should be seeing. Oh no, no. This is from the workshop. Oh, excuse me. What am I doing? Okay. Apologies. I'm a bit. I'm not as versed in using Zoom as the team from CPB is. So fortunately, I don't get to work too much using it.
No worries, Arthur.
And so I was a bit messy with the workshop, by the way, but that's another story. So basically, my interest in Aranya started in 2017, 2018. Aranya is a very interesting neighborhood of the city of Indore, which I didn't know before coming in 2018 when I made the work. I became aware of Aranya and what this neighborhood is and how it was made through friends in architecture and urban planning. Just to say a few words, Aranya is a very interesting case. It's quite a unique case, actually, in terms of housing provision for the poor and for the sort of like lower income groups. The neighborhood was designed in the 1980s in the north of the city. I mean, this is a satellite view from 2018, so obviously you can see the urbanization that has taken place. But back in 1980s, all the north of Indore was mostly agricultural land. And so the local authority of Indore actually seized the land and planned it to develop social housing at low cost for the residents of Indore's slums. And the project was handed to a team headed by the architect Balkrishna Doshi, who was already one of the most like famous and renowned architects. So he was part of the modernist architectural movement, and he had been trained under Le Corbusier in particular. Um, from whom he had borrowed modernist architectural principles, but he had always been careful about mixing these principles with local architectural practices, vernacular architecture. And so when the project Aranya was started, Balkrishna Doshi and his team of designers were very keen to make an architectural and urban project that would be well that would fit well the needs and the social but also spatial practices of the people that they were designing for. In that sense, it's a very interesting case because the team of architects and designers had the humility to step down and say, okay, we might be great designers, we might be great architects, but we really need to take into consideration the people that we're going to work for. And also, an architectural project or an urban project should not be set in stone, and its very essence is to keep evolving. So Aranya was founded with these principles in mind, but how do they translate into an urban form was what I was looking to investigate. What you're seeing here is the layout of Aranya, and if you see, it has a very interesting structure where diagonals are quite present. Aranya was basically divided into several sectors, which were allotted to various income groups. Most of it was allotted to lower income groups, but also parts of the city, of the neighborhood, were sold to more affluent groups. That way, money would be raised on one hand to subsidize the sale of plots for the lower income groups so that they would be able to become owners of their plots over periods of 10 or 15 years. The specificity of the neighborhood was that it was designed as a sites and services approach, which means that the housing was not meant to be provided entirely to the people, but it would be left to the people to actually build their own homes incrementally. So basically, what the new residents of Aranya, what they would get is plots very well sort of delimited, access to how to say sanitation, power, all sorts of like urban utility services. But that was it. And then building the homes would be left to them. That way, you design a neighborhood that is always going to be on the move and always evolving to fit the needs of the people who live there. This approach helped solve a very essential question in the provision of low-cost housing: is how do you fund it? Because basically, if you design for people who have such low incomes, they're never going to be able to have the finances to pay for the provision of the entire housing. So the particularity of Aranya is that it was designed by a very distinguished team of architects, but in fact the architecture itself was made by the people. And it's a very interesting case of local architecture that like came up in an area that had a very intricate urban master plan. So the interaction between private and public space was at the center of the attention of the designers. In my approach, I looked more at Aranya so as an urban project rather than an architectural one, in spite of the name of the head designer, of the head architect. And I was more looking at space, how is space designed in Aranya and how is space used by the people. I'm going to start showing, and I won't be speaking as much because I think it's we can have like a discussion a bit later. Okay, so yeah, but so I made the trip to Aranya in March 2018, and I actually stayed there only for a week. So that was a very short trip. In fact, I had thought about it as like a preliminary study of the neighborhood. Turned out that it was actually the last time that I came to India. So that was like the last thing that I did there. So a week can be very short, but at the same time that you get this sense of urgency that sometimes can help you make good work. So I'll just let you enjoy the images now, and then we can, talk about them.
Arthur, maybe could you also share with us the response of the local communities when you were there and how they felt about what you were documenting.
Mm.
And, you know, the whole
Yeah,
question. I mean, most places where I have visited as a photographer, as a photojournalist, that's the first question. Where are you from? Why are you documenting? What are you going to do with this? You
yeah.
know, and rightfully so, because they're the ones who are living there. Maybe could you share how you worked on this relationship and this dynamic when you were there?
So actually, one of the things that struck me, I mean, it's a small anecdote, but I think it's quite revealing, is that for some of these pictures, I used a tripod, camera with a tripod. And so I could hear people say, what is he doing? And people were saying, okay, he's probably doing a survey. And it actually interested me because it made me think, okay, maybe that people in these sort of neighborhoods, low income group, are actually used to being surveyed. Uh, and they might be used to someone coming in and making measurements about the place and sort of trying to study the place. um, but so because Aranya is not such a big neighborhood, it's 80,000 people and I was constantly going around, so after a couple of days everyone sort of had seen me, had caught a glimpse of me, and so people were quite amused by my presence, and would let me would start interacting with me, and they were quite pleased that I was like interested in the neighborhood, because I think that there was a sense of belonging that was quite strong. Um, Most of the interactions that I had were with men, and especially young men, like some even teenagers, young adults, and I think that oriented it pushed the work in a certain direction. Uh, where I felt that maybe it was a sort of like, but the work was also in part about masculinity, and especially in urban settings.
Did they offer to feed you a nice meal or
Oh
anything?
yeah, yeah. Of course.
Yeah, that commonly happens. People are
Yeah,
very generous.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And look,
Love.
I think they probably were wondering what I was doing also, because I was photographing small scenes, right? Like nothing out of the ordinary.
Right.
Um, and the it's a very enjoyable neighborhood to be in, because
Mhm.
it's quite well made. There's a lot of shade. You have a lot of there's a lot of variety in the kind of public spaces that you have, like small squares, up to the larger squares that are right in the middle of the neighborhood, where which are the gathering points, like here,
Mhm.
where you have this. There's a troupe of comedians performing Ramlila every day, for
Right.
example. So like it's it's a very lively neighborhood, and I was actually struck by the difference between what your experience of the city is when you're inside Aranya or outside, because Aranya is like surrounded by quite large roads which separate it very strictly from the rest of the
Right.
city, from the rest of Indore,
Right.
and the kind of quality of space and the sense of like togetherness that you get there. I'm not saying that I was part of it, but I could observe it,
Hmm.
was not present in other parts of the city, even 500 meters away, where it was more of the kind of fragmented urban fabric where everyone would be building their uh, large homes, and but there was no sense of the street as common space, which
Hmm.
you could get in Havana. At
Mhm.
the same time, I could feel that that kind of specificity was at risk of you know uh, uh, disappearing, because
Hmm.
on the outskirts of Aranya, you had like various real estate projects, for example, that were like eating a bit of the neighborhood, because
Right.
the neighborhood has this kind of interesting quality of life. Also, people, even people from the outside, are looking
Mm-hmm.
to live there, and so
Right.
property is quite expensive in some of the more affluent parts of the neighborhood.
Right.
So you have this dichotomy between
Hmm.
a sort of very enjoyable atmosphere, but also a sense that they might, the neighborhood specificity difference might, is at risk, clearly. It is under threat. And yeah, so for example, this is the construction site of a building that was claiming to be the tallest landmark of central India.
Right.
So Sky Earth,
Right.
both office and residential building with swimming pools on the terraces.
Mm-hmm.
Insane. And
Mm.
only 100 meters away from there are some of the oldest homes of Aranya, the 100 homes that were actually designed by Krishna Doshi.
Mm.
So that architectural legacy
Mm-hmm.
is in danger.
Right.
So my, in this body of work, I try to, it started as a documentation project on space and how space is used.
Mm-hmm.
But then within a week, I also found myself making more metaphorical images or, but try to speak about that sort of like danger or the sort of urban zeitgeist that I was familiar with in other parts of India also. Having spent a lot of time in Delhi, I
Right.
could see what full-fledged urbanization could do to neighborhoods. And maybe
I think,
that I was,
yeah, you
uh,
bring up a very important point, actually. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I just wanted to also have our audience ponder over this, that these whole I mean, these whole changes, the impact of urbanization on people, on cities, the whole idea of migration and why it happens and what kind of impact it has. I think it's somehow also captured quite beautifully through your very, very uh, simple imagery, I would say. It's not like that you've tried to beautify anything, things are as they are, but it's really the perspective that you've brought in. And I think one of the core points about photography that I always like to highlight is that it is you that is making the pictures. I know that we all like fancy gear and fancy cameras, and but actually you could easily be making this body of work where you're living, where what's happening in your surroundings. You don't always have to go too far to be looking at uh, looking at the current sort of state in which a lot of these themes are at play. So it doesn't always have to be a protest, it doesn't always have to be, but also one has to be careful about not exoticizing something that's different. So I think that's where I find the beauty in Arthur's work, which I don't know, maybe Arushi, do you want to come in at this stage and share how uh, maybe some of the artist works have been converted into activities, just for our audience, and for all our educators present and some of the participants present, and maybe share a little bit about how we went about that exercise of taking artistic works and making them more accessible to the student community and the the educator community.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
Uh,
there's a bit of
so so I
echo.
usually Aranya is one of my favorite activities. I mean, favorite artworks to take to my students. I usually deal with students between age 10 to 17, and a lot of them are from underserved communities. So my first point of entry is to basically translate the language into the local language. So that is one of the first challenges, and I think a lot of the students have responded very favorably to this artwork because at various stages they could find a lot of the things which is interesting, especially for people, for kids who are much younger, between 10 to 12, the colors catches their eye. So that is something that they find very interesting, the spaces and how the various colors and the motorbikes and various kind of architecture kind of corresponds with one another. So that's something they always find very amusing. So that's one of the things which I always like to do, especially also when we deal with kids who are the younger ages. One of the things I have to keep in mind is that they're not somebody who's very interested in talking about art. So we have to kind of translate the artwork into something that they understand. So we have to hook to their memory and we have to hook to their familiarity. So I often design uh, the activities around the artwork. For example, notice things in the artwork that they find interesting. So a lot of them pick colors, a lot of them pick the spaces, like the small alleys, and then they kind of go into their environment and then they click pictures. So there are a lot of ways they learn from, they find points of familiarity in Aranya, and then they kind of go and observe the same in the photo, in the environment around that. So that's one of the things that I always find very interesting. People take walks, especially during pandemic. It has been something they respond very well to, because the circle of their walk has been very restricted. So it's a way of like just discovering the neighborhood in new light, looking at how a small car fits into an alley, and for the first time kind of noticing that, and noticing how architecture and human beings kind of coexist. For example, this particular image, if I could just pause on that, and
Yeah,
on
sure.
the right side, on the left side, this gentleman sitting in the sun, that is one of the images which a lot of my students kind of just right away click to, is because it's a summertime or it's evening time and you can't do anything, so you just go out and you read a newspaper in a veranda or a little space that they have. So there are those like kind of little activity, how your body is moving around a neighborhood is something they kind of always pick and grasp about. So yeah, it's something all my students have a absolute connect with.
Concerning this photograph, um, the what the person is sitting on is called the otla. That sort of architectural element. That's an element of separation between the street and the home.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly, it's not entirely private, right? But people use it a lot, and that's one of the elements that the team of designers had like identified as central to, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
central Indian architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find a lot of it in Aranya.
Yeah.
Prior
Uh,
to making the work, I had like read a lot of papers which were more focused on architectural side. So I was a bit looking for these elements.
yeah.
Also, of
Actually,
course, there's
in
sorry.
Tamil Nadu, we call it Thinnai. Is that the same as the Otla? I don't know. Priya, maybe you could comment on that. Is Thinnai the same as this small separation between the main house and the street? Uh, I don't know if that's what it is. Uh, but yeah, I think the relatability to your imagery, Arthur, I can completely understand how kids would find so many moments so relatable about this work. Okay, any questions by anyone? We just want to keep time. And Arthur, is there another presentation that you might want to show, or is
Oh
this
yes. No,
it?
I want to show the the workshops
Yes,
results,
yes.
right? So let's
So
do
maybe
that.
you could give a little bit of a backdrop in just
Yeah,
one
yeah,
or
yeah.
two
Of
lines
course.
about what the workshop was, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
share the presentation.
Same. I'll speak for 2 minutes, and then we can watch the pictures and just maybe have the
Sure.
participants like share their experience.
Sure.
Uh, okay, let me find it. Okay, actually, this is going to be a lot more difficult because I'm talking about some like other people's work. So under their like I under their watch. So please, participants, forgive me for all the stupid things that I'm about to say. Um, but so yeah, just to give you a sense of what the workshop was like or about. Um, yeah. So basically, we had 9 participants for the workshop, and the workshop was named In Relation to Place. I wanted to invite people to talk about their own relationship to places and to the places that they want to explore and investigate through photography. So our participants had various backgrounds in design, architecture, journalism, or activism. And the goal of the workshop was to look at existing projects and projects that might be continuing, to look at them, think about them, discuss them, maybe look for new directions or to continue the work, and to question everyone's approach to the projects. So the works covered quite a wide range of topics, from the intimate and the very personal spaces, including mental health, to public spaces, and they raised social, environmental, aesthetic, political, and personal issues. So all in all, it was a very intense workshop in terms of the content that we discussed, and I was really humbled and touched that they would be sharing these works with me and with everyone else, of course. So the participants all showed a really striking sense of purpose and attention and humanity in their approach of places. And so that meant also looking at spatial inequalities, marginalization of groups, communities, or individuals, questioning personal histories, social history, attachment, echoing deep concern for the destruction of living environment. So I'm really happy and honored to be showing their works, which we worked on making edits on Sunday, and then I sort of like polished them for this presentation. I've already shared, these are like slightly shorter versions of the edits that I've shared with them. Let's start. Yep. This is it.
Thank you, Arthur. That was really beautiful. I, I, I mean, I know that we had seen some of these works when the applications had come in, but I think just now seeing it all together in this flow is really, I think it fits perfectly with the title of the workshop in relation to place, and look at how, whether it's a personal space or place or it's an external one, and the kind of the gaze that each one of the participants has brought forward and that you have also kind of looked at, is really wonderfully done. I think we had a question in the chat. What does intersections and intersections mean? I think, was that Kashish's work or whose work was that?
Shish.
Yes.
Maybe I'll play it again. But I just wanted to
Yeah.
use Mukul's picture to raise my virtual glass to all of the participants.
Of course.
I mean, it was really a privilege to be
Okay.
working with them. Oh, okay. So
Priya,
I'll play it again.
can you unmute Kashish?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, may I give an answer?
Yes, Kashish, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, it was exploring the politics of placemaking in with respect to Gurugram, and then further looking at a particular park called Tikona Park in Sector 52, wherein so there were urban villages. There were villages which are now being converted into urban villages, and their farmlands are being occupied by private land leaders, and so on and so forth, and then are being sold off to people. So their public space is now being converted into public space for someone else. So that dynamics and the penetration of the two communities, so that's what I was trying to explore through my work. And thus, the intersection of all of these stakeholders and elements lead to some sort of interaction. So that's how I mean, concluded with the title Intersections and Interaction.
Thank you, Kashish. Are there any other questions for anyone else? I would also like to inform our educators present today that many of the participants of this particular workshop are students of the SACAX School of Photography, which is the Sri Aurobindo School in Delhi. And it's really lovely to see some of their works. This work by Sarabhi Ravichandran is also one of our artists of the Chennai Photo Biennale Edition 3. So it was also very interesting how one artist, a practicing artist, is also, you know, part of this workshop and bringing her gaze to this particular theme. It's beautiful. I think maybe if there are no more questions, maybe I could invite our next artist. Arthur, are there any closing comments or anything from your side before I invite Parvati and Nayantara?
Well, I think I've said I mean, of course, we could be talking at length about
Of
how
course.
about the whole process, but again,
Yes,
I just want to express my gratitude to the team of the CPB and to the
yes,
participants for
absolutely.
the whole journey, both of showing my work, but also interacting with such a diverse group of people. That was really lovely, and like I've said to them already,
Yes.
they can always get in touch with me in the future. I mean, my door is always open.